much for that. I'm sure over the next 5 minutes or so, we may be joined by a few others. So let me just, first of all, welcome you to this hour where we're going to talk about the lottery industry. This is a sort of, we say it's a taster, that's the way it's described. What it really is it's an introduction to the course run by the Gaming Operations Academy on lottery modernisation, which is actually a 2-day course and is at the level 1 in the Gaming Operations Academy. So what that means as a skill stage 1 is that it's a sort of a novice introduction topic. I like to reference it sort of as a lottery 101. The course is really ideal for either people who are new to the industry or to people wanting to get into the industry, maybe sell to the industry, or just basically maybe just looking for some new ideas because they're very focused on their own territory or country and may not be aware what's going on in the wider lottery industry worldwide. Now, the course itself this year is taking place over 2 days, on Wednesday the 14th of June and Thursday the 15th of June, and it comprises of 4 modules. Each module is an hour and a half each. So we basically have about 6 hours over those 2 days. So one of the things you'll find, I'll tell you a little bit about more about me in a moment, is that I have way more material and way more things I can say and talk about in relation to the lottery operations and the trends and the new things that are coming than I can possibly pack into those 6 hours. So what I'm going to try and explain to you as we go through just some stimulation really over the next hour, some of my thoughts about the industry, is the sorts of things that we will touch on in those 3 modules. So the first module is basically about the global market and the different operating models and also the different suppliers within the market. So you can get a feel for the size and scale, but also the limitations of the market, what's happening in regulation versus to the slightly more unregulated side, perhaps, of lottery, or shall I say more grey areas that are certainly growing at the moment. Then the next 2 modules over the next 2 days really then dive deep into the 2 primary product sectors within the lottery market: draw games, which is the largest component of the lottery market, and instant games. And instant games, that's both physical scratch cards, but also very much the emerging and rapid growing area of digital. So we'll look at those and see, again, what's been happening, what the trends are, actually how you develop a draw game. We'll go into things like prize structures and the mechanics behind the basic draw games, from which you can then obviously develop and innovate yourselves. And I'll give you some real insider tips and tricks as to how to do that without needing to be a statistician. And then in module 3, let's say, we'll dive into scratch cards and instant games. Again, I'll describe how they work, how they are very, actually the mechanics of printing and getting a game to market, as well as on the digital side, what makes them very different to casino games, because they are different to casino games. And depending upon where you are in the world, you may, under regulation, have to veer more towards the softer side rather than being able to tread more closely to the casino mechanics. And we explore all of that in module 3. And then module 4 is channels to market. And this is an area which is under rapid change at the moment. If I was doing this presentation about 10, 15 years ago, digital was still really in its infancy amongst the lottery market, despite being very widely used across e-commerce. And in some parts of the world, that is actually still true, which we touch on in module 1. So retail is very, very much still the majority route to market for most state and national lotteries. But the whole rise of digital has shown that there is a growing market there, not just for the established players, but also for new players and new entrants to the lottery market to be able to establish themselves with a much lower cost to market than they previously would have had to endure. So the whole area of digital we will look at. So, some retail basics, digital as a route to selling existing products, but I'll also in that module be looking at the new and emerging technologies that are actually bridging the gap. And that's actually what's most exciting for me at the moment that's starting to happen in the industry, particularly with some of the technology, the retail technology, which really allows you to leverage the mobile phone in your pocket. And I will touch on that later. So first of all, who am I and why am I qualified to talk to you guys about all of this today? Well, I've been my name's Wendy Lawrence. I've been a marketing and e-commerce professional for well over 30 years now. And my lottery heritage starts way back in 1994 when I was an original member of the Camelot marketing department here in the UK. And for those who are not familiar with the UK market, we actually didn't get a national lottery here until 1994. So Camelot won the license to run that lottery for the first 7 years of its life. That was license 1. And I started literally 4 weeks after they were awarded that license. So I was actually there at the very beginning of the UK National Lottery. And my primary role there for the first 2 to 3 years was to launch scratch cards into the UK. So that's a particular specialism of mine, and one that, as I say, I can go into much more detail outside of the strict timings of the courses, should anybody wish. I sort of came back into the lottery world about 15 years ago when I went freelance, and I've been consulting to the lottery and iGaming sectors in all of that time. And some of the highlights of my time there, I have worked for a number of the large suppliers to the market. I spent about 3 years working with GTech, who've now obviously become IGT. And principally, I was there as a consultant on the digital side, and particularly digital marketing and CRM, trying to help lotteries obviously get on board with iLottery at that time. I've also worked in the global department at Camelot, went back into Camelot and worked on a global basis there. I have worked for Tip24, they're currently now renamed as Zeal. Again, looking at their business-to-business proposition in the digital space. In 2017, I launched a brand new society and charity lottery. I was part of a very small team there as Chief Marketing Officer, launching a new society lottery in Wales called Lottery Cymru. That was a digital-only lottery and based under the charity regulations, which, again, I explain more in the course, but I'll touch on in a couple of slides' time. I've obviously been trainer for the Totally Gaming Academy which was part of Clarion, which has obviously now become the Gaming Operations Academy for several years. And I was very fortunate pre-lockdown to do several face-to-face 2-day workshops where obviously we could cover a lot more material and get a lot more hands-on. And I've also done some training courses for lotteries such as the Croatian National Lottery. I believe we may have a couple of people from there on the call today. I've been to Brazil and spoken to Caixa. I've been to Cyprus, and I've also spoken to representatives of the Nigerian lottery. So I've been very lucky to meet a number of different organisations, both from operators and also on the regulatory side. I've done courses for the UK Gambling Commission and the regulator in South Africa. More recently, and this is why I'm sort of hot housed in the trends and the technologies that are within the lottery industry currently. I acted as Chief Commercial Officer for a company called the New Lottery Company. We were formed to bid for the latest license to run the lottery in the UK. We had to put together a very detailed and formal bid, which included everything from our game strategy to our channel strategies, to what technology platforms we would use, to our entire business models. I was a fundamental part of that team. And as you can imagine, if we were looking to a license to run for the next 10 years, and therefore had to look very much into the future of how we would run things and do things very differently and more efficiently than the current Camelot. When that particular gig was up, because sadly we didn't win, I then became acting Chief Marketing Officer for the Health Lottery, which was another society lottery owned by the company behind the backing of the new lottery company. And I did that from April until Christmas last year, principally looking to up the ante on digital marketing and try to turn effectively a business that had seen a decline in sales into one where we were seeing growth again. And I'm pleased to say that we managed to achieve that. As I say, I'm now trainer for lottery in the Gaming Operations Academy. And I hope from that summary you can see, as I say, I could go into very specific and detailed courses about any aspect of my history. The particular course that's coming up in June, as I say, is really a Lottery 101 that covers a lot of things in a relatively small amount of detail. But I could, of course, do any amount of bespoke or particular courses for anybody if they were interested in a very, as I say, a very specific aspect of day-to-day operations or anything like that. So before I move on, I just want to say a big thanks to Emirat. Emirat have kindly sponsored this course, which means that it's definitely going to happen. And it also means that we can offer more attractive prices to everybody who attends. So my big thanks to them. Emirat offer world-leading lottery, insurance and jackpot coverage. And whilst that's not something, if you're a state or national lottery operator, you may consider that you need, this is clearly a market that has evolved very much in the commercial lottery market, but also is something that I think if you're a smaller jurisdiction that just can't offer the sorts of jackpots that larger countries and countries who band together with things like multi-jurisdictional lotteries can do, then insurance is a very interesting way to be able to boost those headline prizes without actually having to have the money flowing through the pots. And obviously we talk about whole mechanisms of draw games and actually how you do price structures as part of the course, and you can see how limited you can be in what you can offer if you're limited to just the money that you're taking in and the prize pot. So thank you very much, Emirat. Just wanted to make sure I gave you a shout out. So why is lottery interesting in the first place? I obviously get very excited about lottery, love it, been in the industry for a very long time. And one of the reasons is it is just mind-boggling how big it is. According to the WLA, and this is the 2019 sales, they always report a couple of years behind, so we should be expecting the 2020 figures any minute now. But bear in mind, whilst it grows, it doesn't grow exponentially. So this is a mature market. That's a market that's worth an estimated $336.2 billion every year. And that is based purely on the revenue reporting of World Lottery Association members, which make up the state and regulated market. This figure does not include any of those third parties, the commercial lottery organizations, society lottery organizations, or any other brands outside of the pure targeted and regulated market. So the true figure will be even bigger than this. And why lottery? There's a big, massive quote there, but I mean, I'll cut to the chase of that quote that basically shows that whilst when people are talking about gambling and iGaming in particular, they're very quick to look at the commercial gambling sector and casinos and sports betting. I mean, we all know how humongous sports betting is, but lottery is predicted to be double the size of the casino segment by 2026. So, you know, I'm just putting it into context here. The lottery market is going to be at 336 billion now, because the casino segment is only projected to reach 153.1 billion by 2026. And what's really interesting for me is that there's massive potential on a regional basis for lottery, because all things are not equal in that market. So again, these are the official WLA figures broken down. But what we can see is that Asia, the Pacific, Europe, and North America basically dominate the pie globally. And it's one of the things that I found very interesting, particularly talking to people like Kaisha in Brazil, that, you know, basically Latin America and Africa clearly have so much potential to grow their share. They're very underrepresented in terms of global lottery sales by region. Now, there are obviously all sorts of political and historical reasons for that. But as markets develop and as technologies develop, I think the potential there is obviously huge. And equally interesting, I find, is that the differences in terms of games and game profiles between regions is also very interesting. And bear in mind, this is the regulated market. But what you see there is that, across most of the world, draw-based games make up about half of the market. Sports games, what I would call sports pari-mutual games, about anywhere between 10 and 30%, and instant games sort of making up very small amounts in Africa and Asia, about 27% of the market in Europe. But then take one look to the right hand side of that chart and just see how huge instant games are in North America. They make up 59.3% of the market, and actually are way bigger than draw-based games. There are historical reasons for that, and again, we talk about that more in the course. But it's a peculiarity, and it's one of the things that I like to point out, because when you talk about lottery and lottery organizations and lottery operations, it's a very mixed bag. No two lotteries are the same, no two countries are the same, even though sometimes they sit under the same regulations, such as European regulation. Again, we look at that in the course, but here's a very stark example of that, where in North America they barely scratch the surface of the potential of sports games. They barely scratch the potential of digital games, and they are very reliant on that retail distribution of scratch cards. Whereas in Europe and other parts of the world, it's a slightly more balanced mix. Latin America, again, very draw-based focus, which shows there's a huge potential both for sports and instant. So that's just a little snapshot. We spent an hour and a half looking at the lottery market, different lottery models, and so on. So I'm just going to, here's a quote from the New Zealand lottery, which sort of reiterates what I've just said. The biggest issue is that comparing lotteries is a complex business. They vary considerably in their regulatory frameworks, social and cultural environments, physical terrain, potential numbers and relative economic wealth of players, the degree of state control, the cost structures, and the amount of competition with their markets. Never a truer sentence was ever said about this market. And it also means that I can't possibly sit here and, from your perspective, understand exactly what you would need to get out of a course. Everybody on this call will be coming from a different perspective. So I try to keep it quite general to start with, and then we can always do deep dives into different things upon request. The other thing to sort of point out, though, is that the average sales per capita is relatively modest. So those huge revenue figures are being generated because, generally speaking, lottery products are mass market products. So you've got lots of people playing them, but they're not spending huge amounts of money. The upshot of that is that there is upside without even getting close to touching irresponsible gaming, etc. At an average about 136 euros per annum. And lottery games are highly profitable. The average draw game has about a 50% payout. The average instant game has anything from sort of a 55 up to a 75% payout. So we're not talking about the realms of commercial casino games, for example, where they may be paying out 96, 97%. So they require an awful lot of throughput, multiple plays, multiple reinvestment of winnings to start to attract a reasonable margin. These are high margin games. And the reason they're high margin games is because the whole reason they exist is to generate money for good causes. So the state and regulated sector is on average, and again, it's an average figure because nobody, there is no one rule, is probably looking to take 20% of that as a minimum, 20 to 25% as money straight out and going into good causes or taxation or whatever a purpose the lottery is set up for. But from a commercial point of view, if you're sitting here on this call coming from the commercial market and saying, how could I potentially make lottery work for me? You know, those margins are what you are competing against. And therefore, there is a lot of skin in the game to either offer better products in terms of winnability or to generate greater margin in return for your innovation. So here's some of my controversial statements, just to basically kick things off and see you can see where I sort of come from. The harsh reality is that the state and regulated market, and they'll hate me for saying this, and I know there'll be people on the call who are from that market, but it doesn't move very quickly. It's not massively innovative. I've sat in many a conference in the lottery industry, a WLA or an EL or a Lafleur's conference, where the height of ingenuity and innovation is a different color of scratch card, or a tie-up with a brand franchise. In terms of true innovation, in terms of real new ways of doing business, new games that genuinely disrupt the market, they're pretty few and far between. If we actually look back and look at Powerball and Mega Millions in the US, which sort of really put draw games on the map in the US, even though we still, you know, aren't as popular as scratch cards, they were way back in the 90s that they were introduced. Euro Millions, which sort of took that same model, so there's a lot of copying goes on across the market, really didn't happen until 2004. So it was a whole, you know, a whole decade later did Europe basically go, that looks like a good idea, we'll do that too. And then, you know, interactive digital instant win games. So when you bear in mind that, you know, that the dot-com bubble really started in the late 90s, it was only the UK National Lottery that started putting digital games that were digital only games online in 2004, and it's taken a considerable amount of time for a lot of state lotteries to catch up with that. So the lottery offering to the consumer in a lot of places has been quite the same for a very long time. In fact, I don't think I'm giving away any secrets that in our bid for the UK National Lottery, that actually was one of our criticisms of the last few years here in the UK, that there really hadn't been much innovation. And whilst I appreciate and very much understand that as a national lottery, launching a new game in retail can be a very expensive business, and you know, one that you don't wish to fail. But with the advent of digital technologies, the opportunity to trial things, you know, withdraw them, improve them, etc., is really there. And there is little excuse, I think, for the slow development that we've seen in that market. One area I think there's been more innovation, particularly in the UK, and I think the UK is particularly strong in this sector, is actually in something called society lotteries. Now, again, internationally, this may not be applicable because it depends on your regulation. But in the UK, and I believe this applies to the majority of Europe under European regulation, charities or not-for-profit organisations can also run lotteries. Now, they are subject to very specific limits and regulation, which means that they are in no way competing with their national equivalent. So, for example, in the UK, you can't see a jackpot of more than, they call it 10% of the total, which would basically be about £500,000. Nothing like the multi-millions you see being offered on a Euro Millions jackpot. So they are very much in their niche, but they have seen really quite impressive growth figures over the last few years here in the UK. And that growth is largely driven by one particular brand, which is the People's Postcode Lottery. And I think they're a very, very interesting model. Again, whether you're a commercial company or a society lottery looking to get into the market, what they've done is create a very simple mechanic, which is, in our case, it's postcodes. In America, it would be zip codes. Whatever the locator, your postal locator, becomes your entry. So you don't have to pick numbers. But I think more cleverly, what they've done is make it a monthly subscription, so that they do not have the high cost of marketing to consistently prompt people to buy tickets every week. And where I have worked on society lotteries that have had that pay-as-you-go model, my conclusion from those experiences is that it's almost impossible to make money, because what you have to spend to remind people is not on a scale that's commensurate with your revenue ability. So this model of having subscription, I think, is very interesting, and one that could be applicable in a number of different scenarios in terms of lottery offerings. Another example of people, I think, who are sort of breaking the mold is what I call lottery messenger. Now, lottery messenger services have been around for some time, and the key distinction between lottery messenger services and other commercial lotteries that appear to be selling tickets to well-known draw games is that lottery messenger really are. What they're offering is a service to players who may not live in that jurisdiction to be able to enter. And as a result, it's the player that actually is paying the premium for that entry. But the key here is that the lottery ticket is being bought. I find that, again, quite interesting, and one that hasn't, it's been around for a while. There's third-party technologies, companies like Lottotech, that you can use and you can sign up to enable you to do this sort of purchase, whether they're sending out literally physical people to buy tickets in stores, or more likely, where there is a digital interface, obviously buying them digitally, and then allowing the player to literally see their physical digital ticket. I find, again, that really interesting, and an interesting way to open up markets to countries where they currently can't have them. Now, from a regulated market point of view, is this a threat to you? Well, on one hand, you could say no, because the physical ticket is being bought, therefore the money is going to the state, it's going to the good causes. On the other hand, you could say it's offering more product choice and therefore potentially cannibalizing the sales of the local games. Both fair arguments. The question I would pose as to whether there's actually some potential in these models or in this technology to actually see greater collaboration between countries and states to actually open up markets and test products potentially without actually having to launch them with all the razzmatazz and costs that comes with. Question. And perhaps more interesting, I find, with the lottery messenger model is the spin on it, which is the syndicate spin. With these days of social media and all the rest of it, one would have thought that people's networks and friendship groups and extended, I'd say, well, network groups will probably do, but that actually bringing people together to buy more chances to win would be a bit of a no-brainer. And yet it's not something that's particularly leveraged much in the lottery market. Most lotteries will give advice, and in their heads it's still the old-fashioned notion of people in the workplace getting together and signing a piece of paper, and Madge going down at lunchtime on a Thursday and buying the tickets for the following week with the real money. But again, digital applications to syndicates have way more potential and way more reach potentially, but we've yet to really see them come to market and be really pushed. We have seen it in the lottery messenger market, where, for example, you can buy into a group, an anonymous group of so many lines in this week's Powerball, for example, and if your numbers came up, you would win the appropriate share of the prize that group win. I think this is really interesting and has a lot more potential beyond. And if you combine that with the subscription model that I mentioned earlier, that could be quite an interesting proposition. Moving on then to I think again, if I'd been doing this presentation 5 years ago, maybe even 7 years ago, was probably causing the most consternation in the regulated market, and that was the insured model. I mentioned Emiraten Insurance earlier on. Insurance really came to prominence with Lottoland. Again, for those people, I'm sure most people on the call have heard of Lottoland. It started off leveraging the absolute brands and products that the regulated market sells. So it would be promoting Euro Millions in the UK and suggesting that you were buying into Euro Millions. There's been, again, on a local and regional basis, some crackdown on actually how Lottoland are able to present themselves. So now, whilst they are presenting opportunities to win in exactly on games in exactly the same way as you were buying a ticket for them, they're not allowed to use the same brand names, and they're not allowed to use necessarily the same draws as they were previously on which to base. But you know what? I take my hat off to Lottoland. It's very inventive. Effectively, the way that they run the games is that they take a draw which has exactly the same prize structure and matrix as, say, for example, Euro Millions, and they offer at every tier the exact same prize. So as a player, the player experience is exactly the same. You pick your numbers and you enter, and if you win the jackpot that's being promoted on the official draw. And the way that they can do that is that they basically pay out the lower tier prizes themselves out of the money that they take in, but they insure against anybody winning the jackpot. It's a pure statistical play where an insurance company looks at it and says, what is the likelihood of somebody actually winning from the volume of entries that you're going to get, that they actually get the combination. And so they pay a premium to an insurance company, and if somebody wins, they win, and the insurance company pays out. Fascinating model, and I think one that has lots of potential in different guises across the lottery world, from anything, as I say, from just being able to offer larger jackpots in smaller jurisdictions through to more imaginative ways. This is Geolotto. I was quite close to this when I was working at Tip24 because they purchased an interest in it. It failed. So the reason I put this one into the presentation is really just to say, people have tried innovative things and they haven't always worked. But I think the principle of looking beyond just numbers, again, we're very fixated on numbers and symbols in the lottery world. This particular proposition used Google Maps, and basically you bought a square on Google Maps. So it could be your home. It could be the place where you proposed to your wife, where you got married, your favorite place in the world, in the country, the goal at Old Trafford. If you're a Manchester United fan, you basically bought your square of the map. It was like a little treasure map. You got your square, and if your square came up, you won. I think actually a really, really interesting game and quite easy to understand, but probably suffered again from not having the deep pockets to be able to launch and market and explain at a time when really you needed to be on mainstream media, TV in particular, to get these sorts of things across. So unfortunately, this one was a failure. But again, there's new technologies coming out, new ways of doing things on your mobile phone potentially, that means ideas like this could potentially have some mileage moving forward. And again, my last one here, sort of really on draw games and etc. in terms of modernization and different ways of thinking. I don't know again where in the markets you guys are from, whether this is prominent or happening, but it certainly is here in the UK. We are seeing a massive rise in the number of commercial operators launching what we call free prize draws, or rather prize draws. They get away with it because they offer a free entry mechanism. So it falls under competitions and promotions regulation instead of gambling and lottery regulation. So again, one of the big names, the big brands is Omaze, which offers sort of every couple of months the chance to win a multi-million-pound home. But but they are by no means alone. Literally, I've seen probably popping up on Facebook 4, 5, or 6 new brands I'd not seen before in the last couple of months. So this is gaining a lot of momentum in the UK. And again, if you're a free prize drawer and not a lottery, you don't, whilst Omaze donates money to the NSPCC, to charity, you don't have to. So again, margins and profitability in this market are potentially stealing from the lottery market, but it's very interesting. As I say, this is really gaining some traction at the moment here in the UK. Looking at digital games, instant games for a second. I guess the potential for innovation is not quite so huge until you start looking at crossover of digital. I mean, at the end of the day, you're still talking about a piece of cardboard that needs to be pulled off a roll. But a couple of the things that I think, when you have got such a visual display, are of potential interest is actually giving the player more choice potentially, and actually how the money that they're generating for good causes is spent. So quite a dated one now, but London 2012. There was a specific scratch card where anybody who bought that card, it was ring-fenced money towards the London Olympics. That doesn't usually happen. It normally goes into a pot, or it goes into, as I say, just general taxation. So giving players a bit of power, I think, to determine where their money goes is a good thing. And likewise, the American example on the right-hand side, which was specific to a charity. I think, again, that has much more potential. And again, if you start seeing that in digital terms and people just being able to click on a button and maybe determine where their good cause money goes every time they play with you digitally, I think that has some really quite interesting player power. One other thing, again, it doesn't really seem to have taken off. I'm not quite sure why. But again, I salute the Canadian lotteries for their attempts to try something novel. And in this particular case, it was, you hear of multi-jurisdictional draw games, the likes of Euro Millions and Powerball, where states or countries combine in order to get more players and therefore higher jackpots. The Canadian lotteries did the same thing on a scratch card, so they could offer even greater prizes and even greater potential. There has to be something in this. Again, maybe when digital and physical becomes more ubiquitous, so that crossover, there may be more potential in this area. But this sense of collaboration, I think, has just the potential to generate so much more interesting prizes for players that it really merits more thought. Now, I mentioned interactive instant win games earlier on. What I mean by an interactive instant win game, as opposed to just a digital scratch card or a casino game, is this is a very specific market aimed at the mass market. Now, if you are in a jurisdiction where you're allowed to offer casino games, and I've seen this in the American states as digital is opening up, they tend to err on offering games that very much more at that sort of extreme high payout, much more akin to digital, to casino style games. We explore the difference more fully in the course. But in reality, I think all that does is play to a certain segment of the market, which is those who are naturally attracted to the more gambling casino style of product. That is by no means everybody. And I think you're missing a trick, actually, by ignoring the mass market who don't particularly gamble that frequently. And I think it's something that maybe unwittingly or by design, the UK National Lottery did actually land on. And they've created an entire category, which are just, as I say, soft games that have more broad entertainment appeal. So one of the examples is by using Monopoly. I'll play a quick demonstration of it to you. So as you can see there, it's totally and utterly based on the board game. So it will appeal to people, you know, who are familiar with that brand. It offers multiple chances to win. It's a basic symbol match with the properties. It offers mini games. You win by the opposite player, you know, landing on your property and paying rent and so on and so forth. So it's an extended play game that can bring to life a lot of the features that in the physical scratch card market you start to see as markets evolve, which is more chances to win, more play value, higher price tickets, etc. But the most important thing here, and I've seen the statistics, is that they appeal to a very, very broad section of society. So it is not your typical gambling player. It is very, very much broad, you know, mix of everybody, male, female, even split and so on. So even if you do offer casino games in your portfolio, I would highly recommend looking at some of the softer games. And again, bear in mind, these are much higher margin games than traditional casino plays. So as part of a portfolio, very interesting. I'll just show you one more example, just to show they don't have to be so complex. This game, for example, is only 25 pence. And so it's very much an entry-level game, and it's a simple match 3 game. Again, we talked about all the mechanics of instant win games in the course. As a player, you're picking, you know, you're clicking on the duck, so you feel like you have some sort of control over the game. The reality is you don't. You know, that 500 would have come up whether you picked on the left-hand duck or the right-hand duck. But very clever, an illusion, a slight illusion of control, but quick, 25p game. And, you know, again, digital enables you to offer a multitude of price points you simply couldn't afford to do in the physical world because you're printing physical real estate. So let's plop it up. So, you know, my challenge really is, where's the new? And, you know, if in the 6 hours we would spend together on the next course, we can start to throw around some ideas and to see some of this stimulation as ways to create innovative new games, then, you know, I think that would be fabulous. That's sort of on the game side. Obviously, one of the modules is about channels. So I'll just share some things with you. So as I mentioned, retail distribution is still massive. Even in the UK, where digital has been established for some extensive time, it's still about 65 to 70% of the market. So in state and regulated lotteries, retail, you know, is still king. And everybody has their PlayStations, and everybody has their terminals at the till points. There's lots of technologies coming out now. Very quickly, I'll flick through some that you may or may not be aware of. First of all, there are self-service terminals. Now, over, I think the government's dead body would these be allowed here in the UK, but in America, where they have been able to introduce them, some of the lotteries have seen some really good results there. In fact, in some of the European countries like Italy, you very often will see scratch card vending machines, so similar, but these encompass draw games too, so you don't have to go up to the counter and queue to get your lottery ticket. Again, something that has been rolling out, particularly in the States, not so much here, but has gained some traction, is actually being able to buy lottery tickets when you buy your petrol, your gas, pay at pump. So literally, you sort of while you're waiting, you can just plug in to get a lucky dip ticket, and it'll print it out as a receipt straight from the machine. I have to say, in my experience of paying at pump for petrol, quite often the receipts aren't working, so I guess they'd have to make sure that wasn't a problem. And similarly at ATMs, so increasing distribution points is one way, obviously, of making sure you're getting your lottery products in front of more people more frequently. Here in the UK, we're seeing sales at the till points, at checkouts, for example, becoming much more prominent. A number of the major supermarkets and also Lidl and Aldi are now enabling you to buy a lottery ticket actually at your checkout, so alongside your grocery purchase. Let me go past it, but this is where I think the real exciting future is happening, and that is the use of mobile to actually act as that bridge between digital and retail. I think this is where the next step change in lottery is going to come. So not only a lot of the scratch cards, and we'll look at some examples in the course, looking at extending play and giving way more value to the customer for each game by allowing digital extensions to the physical ticket. So you play the physical ticket, then you scan, go online, and you can either play some more or have some bonus games and all the rest of it. Mobile's also being used obviously for loyalty purposes, but I think the most exciting thing is its combination with the new generation of terminals that are coming out. And that is where literally players will be able to interact with the terminal themselves. No longer will you necessarily have to hand over a paper play slip. You could have your numbers already selected. As you can see in the image on the right hand side there, that's an image from the IGT website on a terminal that they currently have. And just scan a QR code, and that will actually generate your ticket, from the machine for you. So it's combining the two things. We would now know, for example, if you are registered to the lottery with the app, that you've bought a ticket in retail, which is precious information and data the lotteries have never had before. This becomes, as I say, extremely exciting when you start to combine this with digital only games, with loyalty, and so on and so forth. And again, that's something we'll talk about in that module. So that's it. But guys, hopefully I've just given you a taster of the breadth that we would cover. Again, just to repeat, the course is on the 14th and 15th, 2 modules per session, an hour and a half each, so 6 hours in total. But again, if anybody has specific interest in anything in particular, please do talk to Adam or myself about it, and we can always put together bespoke agendas for you. But I hope I might see some of you on the 14th, 15th of June. I appreciate that I've been talking a lot at you. I'm afraid to say when I'm on limited time, that's a little bit of my style. I'm more than happy to stay on the call and take any questions from anybody beyond the hour if necessary. So I'll throw it out. Does anybody have any questions? By the way, I'm afraid to say I can't really see chat at the moment. So I've just brought it up on screen so everyone will see the question. So welcome to, thank you. Will you share the PowerPoint? Thank you. I won't be sharing this PowerPoint, I'm afraid, Elena. But sorry, Elenida. But if you join the course, you will get all of the course material. Do I expect the white paper will include anything impacting lotteries for free draws? No, I don't, Richard. I think the white paper gambling review is very much focused again on casino, on digital casino. But I think the thing that may impact lottery will be anything that comes out regarding affordability checks and responsible gaming. I don't believe, for example, that the government at the moment are particularly looking at the free prize draw market, even though it has been brought to their attention. I was party to a what do you call them? The committees, parliamentary committee session, where they invited people from the society lottery market in to discuss their issues and etc. And it was specifically raised by a couple of the members of the society lottery market who were particularly concerned that it was having an adverse impact on their ability to fundraise. So it's been brought to their attention, but I don't think it's on their radar yet. Impact of metaverse. Oh my goodness me, do we want to go to a huge topic there? NFT marketplace, play to earn games. Very interesting. I think inevitably it is going to. The question is when. It will have an impact, but when? And given in the state market, I've shown you how slow they are to move. It certainly won't be in the state and regulated market. I know of lotteries, for example, commercial lotteries that use Bitcoin or other currencies, and they do that in order to go into territories where owning a credit card or a debit card or having some other means to pay may be more problematic. So cryptocurrency has started to creep in. Blockchain has been discussed in terms of actually, how you could make the the algorithms and the operations of lottery draws more transparent. That's all been discussed openly. But I think in terms of things like NFT, you know, obviously there's always the opportunity to, and we're seeing this in the prize draw market, the opportunity to offer prizes, you know, that money can't buy and things like that. And some of the things that are available on the NFT market could very well become, you know, quite interesting sources of prize pools, etc. Play to earn games, 100%. You know, I think everyone's probably gets bombarded with adverts for things like missed play, where you can earn Amazon rewards for playing things like Candy Crush. You're not actually being rewarded for playing Candy Crush, you're being awarded for sitting through adverts while you're playing Candy Crush. But I think that whole social contract, if you like, of rewarding players for providing their data to you and making that very overt, I think is very, very interesting. In the regulated market, they would never allow play to earn games because that would be seen to encourage excess play. But in the commercial market, I see no problem with that at all, and actually encouraging that loyalty in some form of reward or payment. So I think interesting question, Mocha. We could spend a lot of time on that one. Thank you. Much interesting subject like app in retail or player knowledge strategy in retail, selling at checkout. Yeah, Nicholas, me too. It's really as a result of the work I did on the bid for the UK National Lottery that a lot of this stuff really started to come to light. And I genuinely believe wholeheartedly that digital and mobile in retail is the next big step change. And we, as I say, I'll dedicate quite a bit. How much can you in an hour and a half? But you know, we will talk about that in the course. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, time. Any other questions? You can also ask them out loud if you want to come off mute, or shall I just assume that that's everyone? Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. As I say, I don't know you all. I hope I might meet some of you again in the future. Maybe some of you will come on the course. But whatever you do, if you have an interest in lottery and there's anything you want to follow up on, please do get in contact with Gaming Operations. There may be much more that we can do for you there. 5 minutes early, look at that. Amazing. I will hang on till everybody goes, just in case anybody has a question that they didn't want to ask in front of the rest of the group.
Thanks, Wendy.
Okay, I'm going to sign off now, everybody. Thank you.